Hello, 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 and welcome to Mythological Mayhem on Mythborn Live. We're episode 36. This is going to be the last one on creating great characters. Now, I think that there's a lot of different things that we've talked about, and I wanted to really sort of focus on how we go about creating something that's both interesting, that is memorable, but most importantly, what is actually believable, right, as a character. So in doing that, let's just review a couple of things, and I'll put them up on screen, but we're going to get a little crowded, so eventually I'll probably just put them below. But if you think about it, we talked last week about everybody's a hero in their own story, that great characters have flaws, and what is your character journey? How do they change? If you want to know about these three and you want to get a good idea of what we talked about, see the earlier videos. That'll be a better, deeper explanation. But in essence, what you really want to think about is that people believe in a character that has something that is memorable and interesting about them, but everybody thinks of themselves as, I think, a force that is a force of change. And if they can be a force of change, if they can actualize themselves as a force of change, if you write them as a force of change, they're going to come off, they're going to ring truer. So let's talk about the last things that you really want to do. Now, there's a lot of things, and you can look them up online, and I'll go through some of the things that, great sort of places talk about, but I would suggest the following. When I do characters, one of the things I try and do is I write up a conflict map. And what I'll try and do is put up a copy of it here. You guys can see what one looks like because I have one. But when I do a conflict map, I draw the relationship of all the people that are in my world. Now, what's interesting to me, or what's actually the reason why I did this was, honestly, I have a hard time reading or remembering who actually is in conflict with who, especially when you have 15, 20 characters and you have all these minor characters and you want all of them to have some meaning. Otherwise, we'll get into the second thing, which is white room syndrome, and then the third and final thing, which is show don't tell. But so these conflict maps really, really help me create a believable sort of triad of problems. A lot of people get focused on sort of the two people and their problems, like, this guy and that guy have an issue, or, things like that. But the truth is that in reality, groups and things that happen in groups, that's actually a little more interesting. So I used to look at my conflict map and I used to look for triangles, because triangles told me that these three characters can interact, they know each other. And I particularly, the way I do my conflict maps was I would draw lines based on the color of their love or hate for someone. So I looked for conflict maps in which the triangle sides had different colors. That way I knew for sure that, like, we were actually creating something that had the ability for there to be conflict and drama. So when you think about it, if you get stuck in what they call a dyadic relationship, you lose an opportunity for complexity because you lose a third point of view that can change the drama. And so I think when you're thinking about great characters, follow the old 80s comedies, right? Three's a Company, right? Two's a Company would have been funny, but not as funny as having three people there, right? And so I think that ultimately you have to sort of think about this kind of triangle in which the three entities of the triangle, and remember, the entities don't have to all be human, right? It could be a man, a dog, and the past owner of the dog, right? But the point is that you want to have these triangles in which they aren't all, if you use the color coding technique I use, they aren't all the same color. That just means there's three people who get along great. And yeah, sure, that's good, especially if you have something like Fellowship of the Ring. But even in there's some triangles of conflict, right? It's more interesting when you have Boromir trying to get the ring, and Aragorn trying to help, Frodo, and I think that ultimately is where you have really interesting and fun opportunities. So, if I added a new one, we would basically say create triangles. Okay. The next thing I would talk about is when I first started writing, I used to create a scene. In my head, it was a scene. And in the scene, the people in the scene or the animals were the actors. But what I learned from my editors and from feedback is there is another actor in the scene. And it's not your characters. Who is it? Who do you think it is? It's the environment. And the environment that they're in, it also has a life. It also has the ability to add depth, to have interest, to create some kind of interaction with your characters. The environment gives your characters another thing to think about, another thing to consider. The environment adds atmosphere. It can add conflict at times. The most important thing, though, is the environment cannot be what I used to do, which was called a white room syndrome, which is, hey, we're all acting in front of the camera. Let's just put whatever backdrop I need behind me, and we'll just act in front of it, because that's what you see, and it's in some kinds of scenes, and it's very stage-like. It's because you don't have the benefit of a live person to see and interact with. When you write that character and the reader's reading it, and the backdrop is nothing but a 2D backdrop behind them that does nothing, that adds nothing, that doesn't interfere, that doesn't add some kind of value to the interaction, you are in fact creating a kind of white room. And in general, those things don't look as good. They don't feel as real. And so just always think, the next to this final point is you want to have this, your other actor is the scene, the background, right? The environment, the room, the whatever they're in. That is an actor that is a active part of your character's life. So make it that way. Don't make it a non-interactive, non-interesting kind of thing. It's a easy thing to do to ignore, but when the character and the background interact, and there is an opportunity for that background to have a part, you will find your characters doing things that will lead me to my next point, which is so important. So, anyone who's been in beginning, okay, let's just make sure we got this right. So, triangles, and make sure that your environment is included as an actor and interacts with your characters. All right, that leads us to this third point. I think, I think any good beginning writing course will tell you this, and I certainly learned it in high school and college, in my creative writing classes and the rest, and then much more so after I started writing, and my editors would tell me this, and they constantly hear this all the time. So you can Google it and get a ton of things. Everyone says, show, don't tell, right? Show it, don't tell it. A good example of telling is if I were to write something that said, Dan's finger got blown off. But ever since 1987, when nanotechnology had been perfected, getting fingers reattached was very easy. So Dan didn't have to worry about his finger coming off. He just had to put it back on. And then, because healthcare had been universalized, he knew he could afford it. Well, what did I do there? I sort of gave you all the facts, and also in a really boring kind of like, I'm telling you why he doesn't have to worry about it, or I'm telling you more than you would know just looking at the scene. It's much more interesting to show Dan, his finger gets blown off. He looks down and calmly picks it up, and it snaps back on his hand with a magnetic-like click. and bringing along with it a sudden electric shock of pain. He just hoped the finger would stay on until this fight ended. It's not telling you as much, but it's adding a lot more. And by the way, that's just off the top of my head. If when you're writing, you can wordsmith this to be much more eloquent. The second one doesn't tell you as much. It doesn't throw a bunch of things in your, a bunch of facts your way. But it makes you start to wonder, how is he able to pick his finger up and stick it back on? What does he mean if it lasts through the end of the fight? A magnetic click. Why would it click magnetically? There are many little words used in that small, much shorter moment, but it adds so much more detail and questions about the world. And why? Because I showed, I didn't tell. Well, it's really important with your characters that you do the same thing. In my opinion, again, there's styles of writing that do call for this introspection and characters thinking a lot about what they want to do or not want to do. I'm not saying it's bad. It has its use. But in general, if you tell me everything, if I tell you everything as a writer about what my character's doing or thinking and how and what he's going to... If there's no wondering on your part, that kind of anxiety, that kind of wonder, that kind of mystery, that's the kind of stuff that gives your character depth. Because your character knows why he's not worried about his finger, but you, the reader, may or may not know, and it invites you to read on. And I think that's a very, very powerful mechanic when it comes to writing great characters. So show, don't tell, but don't... but now from a character's perspective, show what the character's doing. Show what they are thinking by physical reactions. And this is where I meant the second point fits into this. Because if your environment is also an actor in the scene, your character avoiding someone's gaze by pretending to examine a book or by stepping behind a table to create space because they're uncomfortable, or by wiping the dust from the table and then getting a quizzical look on his face, you can create more things that show that your character is paying attention and that there are clues that the reader should be paying attention to also that build upon what the character is ultimately going to realize. And here's a little secret, right? We as readers, we want to know, we don't want to know everything more than our character, but we always want to know a little more than our character. And I'll tell you why, or maybe I take that back. I don't mean it exactly like that. What I mean is you win a lot when what happens is what the reader thought might happen. Because I'm not talking... If you make your reader feel smart, they tend to want to keep reading. Now, I do not mean that for true surprises, for unexpected deaths, for things that you do want to surprise the reader on. I mean, everyone wants to be surprised also. But in general, if you lead them a little ahead of your character's thinking through clues, through nonverbal communication, through description, through environment acting, through these triangles and the relationships, through the fact that you've made their character a hero, through the fact that their character, a good character has flaws, and that you're on a journey, right? You're working through this. If you do that, when the reader gets it wrong, they will love it. Because they will love it because everything leading up to that point, they've been getting right, and you can set them up for great surprises. However, if they get it right, if that's what you wanted, they feel ultimately rewarded because they were as smart or smarter than the main character you're writing about. And I think that in general, unless you're writing a mystery where you really want to sort of keep things very, surprise-oriented or whatever, I think that ultimately, particularly in fantasy, people want to feel like they get like this journey that you're on. They are curious of what might happen, but they can also put together 1, 2, or 3 scenarios based on what they've seen that make them feel like they're part of the adventure too. And they're not a bystander just being told, oh, but don't worry, he's got a dagger in his back pocket, he's gonna be fine. Like, you don't want to know all the facts, right? You want to be part of that adventure, part of that organic growth. And the organic growth of the reader's understanding of what is going to happen is a function of how well you, the writer, can manipulate these 3 things along with the things we talked about before. I am not suggesting at any time that any one of these things you should always do. Like, you shouldn't always, show, don't tell. There's a few instances where telling someone something really quick does make sense. I'm not suggesting that every time a reader gets surprised, they hate the book. That's not true at all. Like, people love being surprised. But I'm also not suggesting that every time they can figure it out, they love the book, right? What I'm saying is that you have to use each of these like strings on an instrument. And when you can harmonize them correctly, these 6 strings, you can create melody. You can create amazing, amazing music in writing. So as a writer, think how you want to, make your character the hero. Think how, even when they're evil, give them the perspective of how they think they're a hero. Make sure that you don't take the easy way out. Write a character with flaws, right? Because flaws are interesting. Flaws are fun. People don't necessarily want to read about a character that just is perfect all the time. Think about your character's journey. It doesn't matter if they start and end in the same place, but there needs to be something in between that is filled with drama and has some kind of revelation and some kind of growth. The character growing means they may have come back to the same place they were before, but the arc, their story arc, is what kept the reader engaged, right? And that's one other string you have. Look for triangles. Look for opportunities where there can be a three-way interaction that adds more drama and more interest than 2 ways. Because 3-way interactions allow you to avoid show, don't tell. Allow you to avoid telling, right? It lets you give another person in the room or in the interaction to bounce off showing, right? To bounce off reactions and to bounce off how your characters are perceiving things and how they react to them. It makes them feel more real. And also finally, show, don't tell. No white room syndromes. No white room syndromes. Make your environment another actor in the scene. Have them come in and have them be part of the dialogue, be part of the interaction. They will add so much more color and so much more value to your characters if you include them overall in the scene. There's a dozen other things that you can do that make your characters interesting. For sure, read your dialogue out loud. Listen to yourself when you read it. It's amazing how many times you read it out loud and you go, oh, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. No one talks like that. So just read it out loud to yourself. If you don't want anyone to hear you, do it in private. But reading it out loud lets you know whether or not you're using too many words. Because frankly, that's usually the problem. Too many words to say something simple. Most people don't say a lot a ton of stuff over a long period of time. And you have to remember that brevity is actually your friend, because uncertainty adds to the flavor of the drama. But these 6 strings that we've talked about, these are the things that I think if you just can get somewhere ahead and thinking about it that way, they add so much more value to the way that you build a character and the way that your characters come off as great and interesting and horrible in a good way, like we hate them because they have something in them that's deeper than being a cardboard cutout, right? With normal lines that they throw out. Thanks for joining me. I have no housekeeping. I will let you guys know what's going on. The audiobook is doing really well. We are super, super excited to be continuing the series forward. You'll be hearing some more news in the near future. And please share this channel with your friends. Like, subscribe, join us, and pass this on. I hope you enjoy talking to me, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the very near future. So next time, more mayhem, more mythological mayhem and management. Nope, more mythological mayhem with Mythborn Live. Episode 36. This is Creating Great Characters, Part 3 of 3. Peace.